Because I heard Trustee Petrick say
Ann Arbor's was 1 billion.
$1 billion. So I was trying to gauge what is our expectation? If there was an expectation, maybe we don't know it yet because we're still trying to figure things out.
Under the Fieldman story or plan that over 30 years, it would be roughly about $1.5 billion to kind of go through their model of what was new and remodeled, and it was a hybrid of that.
Okay.
Now, obviously, the longer we wait, the inflation factor continues to grow. So we don't expect it to be a decision made by a year from now to be the same dollar value. We expect it to be slightly higher.
Okay. We talked, because the impression that I got is Quinn Evan came into the picture because there was no historical aspect to the first assessment. That was my impression. What constitute a historical building? When you do your assessment, how would you look at it to determine if it's feasible for a new building or it's historical?
Well, if we're talking, say, capital H historic, of things that we could evaluate to, say, put on the National Register, or if someone had a historic district, we really start looking at the buildings once they're 50 years old. So that's, it's not just the 20, that's the majority, probably 75% of the buildings you had could be looked at by that date, but then you would start to look at and say, what is it about them? It's not every building that's 50 years old, has this character. So that's why we devoted, we do in our office have historians on staff, so we had our historian do some research and look at all the buildings, so we have that statement on all of them, understanding what features might or might not be important on a building. Not in terms of that means that we feel that building has to be saved or not. And then it's looking at the structure of the buildings, and the structural integrity of the buildings is a piece that we look at on those buildings as well, to understand that, and their neighborhood context can be important in that. It's very telling, it's interesting, the site plans that we've done on the buildings and reading about them. There are several that this is built in 42, and it had an addition in 43, 44, 45, 46. It had additions every year for like 4 years after it that people may or may not be aware of. And some of them, what you may think of the Duval as the face of it's from the 50s versus from the 20s. So that's understanding that structure. We do know from our experience and our experience with Gilbane that buildings that are those buildings of how they were constructed in the 20s and the 30s in some ways are very much easier to do major renovation work on, just because of the concrete frame that they have and how they can open up and the durable materials that they have. And so some of that factors in as we start looking at options and costs. So a part of it is historic, but it's us walking through with our experience with buildings of all ages. We've worked on mid-century modern buildings. If you look at McGregor Center in Detroit, the Yamasaki buildings, to looking at the buildings, schools from the 20s, to understand sort of intrinsically walking through, okay, what can we adapt and how much do we need to adapt to really make this a great learning experience. And that's part of, I think, that neighborhood school thought or not, and bringing us in. Piece of it is really bringing in current cost perspectives with Gilbane, and then a piece of it is understanding and helping educate people on where that neighborhood school is so important, and there's not the feasibility to show examples. We have a whole nother presentation and show on how that can feel new. It can feel shiny and new and exciting and bright as a new school while it's still staying in its neighborhood character. And so I think that's where sort of just bringing that as an option and a possibility, and then also pairing that with the cost model that we've been developing to help understand exactly what you're saying, that it is cheaper, it's not cheaper, what is that difference in cost?
Yeah, just one more question. You mentioned 21st century schools, and when you're talking about a new, an older building that's built in the 40s, 20s, and you have to change the infrastructure to allow open space, connecting rooms, and how does that impact an older building that you're trying to renovate to a 21st century building? Because it seemed like some of these buildings, they're brick walls, you know, strong brick walls, and in the structure, there would be a lot of tear down and a lot of structure renovation.
Not necessarily, actually. A lot of what you're seeing with some of your historic buildings were walls that were put up way after the original building. So they were walls that maybe, they look like they go up to the roof deck, but they actually don't. A lot of your older buildings have much higher floor to ceiling heights because that's how they were built, leaving a lot of space to put new mechanical systems into them. So every building truly is different. And as we're walking through, it's amazing because there's parts where there's just high ceilings with the ability to do a lot with them. And there were some historic buildings we went into that didn't have those high ceilings. It was just dependent on what the need was at the time and how they put it together. Sometimes it's a little bit more challenging for newer buildings to do those renovations too. So every building is different, and that's what this team is looking at. We are literally not looking to do the cookie cutter, one size fits all, depending on what year the building was built, because we can't.
Another thing with a lot of the buildings from the 20s and 30s with the concrete structure is that we might not get the perfect square classroom with no obstructions if in a 21st century learning model. If we want to make that classroom bigger, there might end up with a column or two within there, and that's kind of a trade-off that you don't really notice after a while, you know. But that would be one thing. But you can clear out everything between that, all of those locker bays. It's pretty common construction type that we've seen many times where the mechanical and the lockers are kind of running down that corridor wall, and most of that can just get cleaned out and you have a couple of columns left, and it really does leave a very open floor plan to work with.
I have a question on foundation. Did you look for each individual school if the foundation is sound and good enough for the next 30, 40 years that you would be able to do major renovation while the foundation is still sound?
We did. There are some schools that we'll have to consider what to do. Anything can be renovated. It comes down to cost. And I think there's probably one or two schools that we may have to make a tough choice on, just because the existing structure of the building is, you talked about spending a little bit more money. You would be spending a lot more money, to the point that, people might question why are you doing that? And so that's part of that feasibility that we're looking to provide with the different cost models when we're looking at each of the buildings. So.
And the other thing is the operations. I know we've seen photos of the exterior buildings and how they look like, and the multi-purpose rooms and space rooms. But for down inside, we're saying the boilers, for example.
Yes.
Right. Is that something that we can maintain and find people who are still knowledgeable in those systems that can maintain these kind of systems?
I wouldn't recommend it, and here's why. Somebody mentioned about the embodied carbon. Embodied carbon just isn't about the bricks and mortar. It's also about your operational costs. Mm-hmm. So reality is, if you have the opportunity to spend some money to upgrade your mechanical systems to energy efficient systems, your operational costs will actually go down, which gives you more to the general fund, which is more towards what you need for anything from teacher salaries to whatever the needs are of the general fund. That's an important note to make when making these decisions. Every one of the the assessments we're looking at is looking at upgrading your mechanical systems. Because if you're saving on energy cost, you're saving on sustainability. You're helping sustainability. It's less gas, it's less carbon. It's reducing your carbon footprint. So it's not just about the embodied carbon, but it's also reducing your carbon footprint on your resources. So, and I think that's important also to look at.
Let's hear from, I know you have a follow-up question, but
Well, I was going to respond to trustee Czar's about neighborhood schools, just as an aside, because when I was first on the board back in the early 2000s, the board as a whole, because we had a bond, a sizable bond that we were doing, and we created a resolution actually to support our vision of neighborhood schools as being paramount, and that we would not disrupt the neighborhood school concept. And we all signed off on that at that time to ensure that the community understood that we would support individual schools and not do something different that would upset that. So I just wanted to let you know there, we did it then, we could do it again if we felt it was necessary.
Thank you, Trustee Petruska, for that perspective. Trustee Barry, and then we have Trustee Watt.
I got a few questions, Chair President Mosip. First one's a comment. When it was mentioned earlier that we will not be going out to the public with the options, that got my attention. I'm sure
That
all the
was-
alders out there got their attention.
Not what I
so-
meant, yeah.
Trustee Barry, if you can get closer to the mic.
So I just want to thank you and thank Tom for stepping up and clarifying that, because I didn't want to go home and my phone ringing off the hook. So, yeah, I know that's not what you meant, but I'm just wanted to thank Tom and Ann for kind of clarifying that. My first question is for Stephanie. You mentioned in Ann Arbor, their first phase, they're putting in air conditioning, then there's second phase and third phase. So should I assume, I did not do my homework like my colleague here, so I assume that they're not building any new buildings?
Oh, they are.
They are.
They are. Yeah, it's a combination of renovation, major renovation, and new buildings.
So they've decided on new buildings and they're not spending any money on air conditioning there, right?
On any of the early beginning of the phase, no, they did not.
Okay,
Because they knew they were going to be going into those schools within the next 5 years. But for schools that are later on in the phase, because, you know, reality is you're not doing all 34 schools in 10 years. Okay, there's not even the labor market to support that. But for schools that are later on, they looked at it that they didn't want the students to wait, 8 to 10 years. They did different levels of improvement. For example, let's talk about boilers. They did boiler upgrades to any school that was going to be about 10 years out. Why? You can always reuse the boiler. So if the boiler's still good, they would just take that boiler out of that school when the time came, put it as attic stock, and use it towards another school that maybe didn't need to have an immediate boiler changeover. Air conditioning, schools that were a little bit sooner, they went with window AC units. When they're done with those window AC units, they put them back in attic stock and they rotate them back in for the later schools. So there was always a plan for them in the major scheme of things that whatever they weren't, if it wasn't at the end of its useful life, their plan was to reuse it at schools that were later on in order to maintain a building or to continue on with its operation until the major renovation came to it.
great, thank you very much. And in your presentation, you mentioned enrollment at Duval is, projected enrollment. Easy math was, it's gonna be down, going 8% to 10%. Where did that information come from? Where did data come from?
So that came from the demographic study that was done in 2022. So that was a earlier study that we were given.
Okay, I have that information. I was wondering if you had some updated information.
No, we didn't
something,
have
because
updates on the projections. It
'cause I-
was from that 2022
Question those
study.
numbers then, and I'm still, I know what's going on, especially in that Duval area.
Yes.
So, Trustee Ajami, there's no solid numbers that we're projecting for right now. Back, in 2019, when we put out a bond for 240, we knew that within 2 years, before we completed our project, we were already $240 million, another $240 million behind, but we weren't ready to go out for $500 million. So this is all gonna come down to what we hear tonight and moving forward, and, what number comes up, we come up with, it's gonna be, on this board, for this board to decide. I like what I'm hearing, Stephanie. I think for the last couple of years, I've always asked, from our professionals, give us the information. Let's keep politics on the side. With all due respect to our good friend Ian, we have former board member here, Mary Bouget, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from former board member Mary Lane and Glenn O'Cray and many, many others. That's on us to sit down and talk to them. We need to know. I mean, the fact that you were, telling us, yes, define what a historic building is or not, what's important moving forward, how are you gonna heat this building, maybe these are hard decisions that we have to make. And the fact that I'm hopefully looking from the administration to keep politics out of it, let the politicians deal with the politics. But what we're paying for is, we need your professional opinion, so I welcome that. So I believe that's all I got.
Thank you, Trustee Barry. Trustee Watson?
Yes, so I wanted to say thank you because your presentation was invaluable in giving us a different way of looking at education. So thank you. I would say a couple of things. For instance, and I think with Trustee Petchikoff, in terms of when we're talking about, for instance, the common space, I think all of us have known the classroom to be, right, this sort of square or rectangle. And so when we go out there to speak with all those individuals or those here, like the use of the common space or that common area, what is that? What is the purpose? I'm looking at that, and as a preschool teacher, I'm seeing kids running up and down the hall. Like, right, you have that long hallway, you got kids running up and down, but you start to fill in those spaces and those the sound barriers from the ceiling, you start to really get a creative, warm space. So I see the elements in there. So thank you for bringing that in. But I think just for all of us moving forward, how do we speak to that when we're out in the public? Because we are educating what we used to, we're re-educating ourselves as to what the classroom looks like, but it's also more of the educational shift and philosophy of project-based learning in groups. So that's just my one comment. The other thing is, in terms of the support space, I think that really kind of struck me as looking at this space and seeing how overwhelming it can be. I think we have a lot of those support spaces for our students and teachers to kind of have a quiet area. And I want to make sure that when our bond is going forward, we do truly have a space that is conducive for discussions, and that it's a welcoming space and it's not overly overwhelming. So those are just two of the notes, the kind of the before and the after, right? So where we can come to. And then I do, thank you for sharing the sort of strategy and timeline of what you're saying in terms of the ACs. I think some of the discussions that we have had was, we know not everybody's going to get what they want when they want it. But knowing that perhaps you were saying, like having the ACs, and then how do we take those ACs and reuse them? So having that understanding of what are those phases and how do we create those phases so that we're being mindful and fiduciaries of these funds, and that we're not going to be throwing them to the curbside. But last is really the labor costs. And I think part of that is, I know last time we were here and we're talking, and it was or maybe it was COVID, and talking about how we had a labor shortage. And now we have these tariffs. So not to put anybody on the spot, but can you share with us, what was that jump perhaps during COVID? And is that same sort of percentage jump? Where are we in that in that area?
I do a lot of speaking on this topic.
Thank you.
So
I'm staring right at you.
this is not news to me. So I'm going to break it down into 3 different categories. One is labor and what happened post-COVID. So post-COVID, we have seen a 30% increase in overall costs, labor and material. It has not gone down. The thought was that it would subside, but it hasn't subsided because we've gone into a global economy. And so we also continue to see a shortage of labor, of our trade labor and our workforce, and that is also driving the costs up. So there's a two-part thing. Will they, labor and material dip up and down but we will never go back to pre-COVID pricing. Those days are unlikely. If they did, we're going into depression at that point or severe recession. So now let's talk about tariffs. Tariffs change on a daily basis. I get asked this question every week from several different boards. And I'll say this. Everybody thought the tariff happened when it left wherever it came from. No, the tariff actually happens once it's processed at the port of entry. It could arrive in the port and sit there for 3 weeks, a month, 2 months. In the meantime, that tariff could have gone away. So it's a hard thing to pinpoint at this point because what we're talking about today could be gone tomorrow. What we're talking about today may not be here yet. The one thing when we look at providing you those projected numbers is there's two things. Escalation, which we've built in to an overall program. And the other thing we're looking at is the potential that you could be looking someday at a tariff, a pandemic, a natural disaster. Really, because we're dealing with a global economy these days, which will never go away, there are so many things that now impact cost of goods and services that we now have to just build them in. And that's when you see the costs come through, that is building in an escalation that's going to span over many years. And I think that's important to know that.
Thank you.
Trustee Petrusco.
Okay, I want to do a quick follow-up. The reason I asked for this was because the fielding study in all three of their option visions had the same number of schools being torn down, basically. Just the location of where they were going to be replaced was changed. It was a concept more than a design, in my opinion, that left out what I thought was a very important piece, especially for the city of Dearborn, the home of Greenfield Village. I kept hearing from a lot of people, well, we don't want to just keep on putting a Band-Aid on the problem. That's how they wanted to phrase what we were doing every time we did anything to a school building to make it safe and at least as comfortable as possible for the current generations that were in there. I wasn't just focused on the historic aspect, although that was extremely important to myself. I was also the environmental aspect. The adaptive reuse that I started reading about was important to me, that we could manage to maintain the same buildings and not add them to the landfills, but be able to get the quality of interior educational experiences that we were looking for, and update and upgrade was a possibility. And if we could do it in the same cost frame, then why not explore that as an option? And the fielding study didn't really include that. And I wanted to make sure when we go out to the community that they understand that that could be a potential option for them to choose from and not disrupt their neighborhoods by impacting moving students out of a building, demoing buildings, putting up as much as it might seem like an easy fix for it. And I don't want everybody to think we're just putting a Band-Aid on the building because we're talking about trying to preserve these buildings that can still be perfectly functional, hopefully. Feasibility is important, and I expect to get the reality check here that not everything is going to be salvageable, but I want to know that I did my homework and gave it to the community, the true options that exist for this. My last question would be, because of the price points, my husband was in commercial construction for decades, and I know the cost factors can change and shift. Whatever we end up choosing, and we put a number on it at the time because we have to put it on a ballot. And then we get into the thick of things, and this is a 30-year plan, basically. We're not going to be doing it, and things go south for us really fast. How flexible, I mean, are these designs that we can say, we don't have the money going forward, there's no way, and we have to back off on certain potential options? Is there a way to not only to have the escalation costs factored in, but also the options of what can we scale back on if we need to save money that way?
So I think that's why it's important, we're looking to bring different cost options with the renovation, major renovation, and new, for you to take a look and see what your options are. We're not looking in any of these scenarios to put a Band-Aid on anything. Very few buildings have new mechanical systems. Even your buildings built in the 90s are going to be coming up on the need for new mechanical systems. I will say, you will not hear come from my mouth the recommendation to keep an old boiler from the 1950s. You're not going to hear it come from me. That's because of the operational costs that are involved and the new energy efficiency that's there. It's a much smaller system. You can reclaim space that you didn't have before. There's like so many levels of why I would never recommend that. I think it's important for everybody to understand that any of the recommendations that are being made, none of them include putting a Band-Aid on anything, because that was not the direction that we've heard from anybody that we've talked to this point.
And I'll say on that escalation point of it, as we dig into cost model on that, what we're looking at is a system where we can start putting time frame to it so that you understand how that changes, over the whole picture versus, prior work that might have said, okay, this is the dollars, assuming everything is built in 2 years, which,
Right.
is not true. That we have that escalation built in, and we have a mechanism to look at it to say, what is that cost for the first project, and what is that cost for the last project?
Thank you.
Trustee D'Ambrosio?
What's the average days of air conditioning that do we use in these schools versus the cost of putting air conditioning in these schools?
I guess that question is for Tom and operations. Do you know? Marcus?
It varies these days.
It varies depending on how you utilize schools. For example, we have summer school at most buildings recently, but not all buildings. So depending on the summer schedule, that could make a big impact. But usually we look at the late April to June as, a hybrid of number of days, because that's when we kind of switch over. It all depends. We've had cold, summers, and we've had very warm summers. And then the August, September timeframe. So you're looking at 5 months of the regular school year that it could come into play, but not obviously every day. But if you're going to get into the summer, that number is going to raise quite considerably. So there's not really an average that I have heard for use in designing of a building.
Climate change.
Let's hear from Trustee Barry, but I want to get Dr. Maleko's perspective.
Trustee D'Ambrosio too, there was a while back when we considered year-round school. That discussion didn't last long because of the lack of air conditioning and summer school programs. I just want to go back to the quote-unquote Band-Aid. We're not hearing you say that some of the renovations might be Band-Aids. We're just looking at what we went through a few years back.
The public.
When we knew we needed $500 million, couldn't go out for it, and we kind of, told the administration sharpen the pencils a little bit, and we came up with 240. And the public said, you're just looking to put Band-Aids on these buildings. And it was like a big push for new buildings and maybe a fourth high school at that point. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons why we failed that year is because the people against was putting it out there that they're just asking for this money to put Band-Aids on the buildings, just to clarify. We didn't hear you, I didn't hear you, I don't think that's what trustee Petrikov was getting at, so.
Thank you.
And just one more comment, 2018-19, we also made that every school had at least a gym or a cafeteria at that time to make sure they had some aspect of beer.
Sure.
Dr. Malika?
So first on that, I just want to say, our engineers work very hard, especially with the old buildings. And this time of year is very challenging for them because we don't know what's going to happen how many of us maybe have switched from the heat to the air in the last month a couple of times, because I was just hearing it last week. We had more mild in March, and then April was really cold. And then all of a sudden the heat comes and people are wondering, why isn't the air on already? We heard those comments just last week. But anyway, I just want to say I appreciate the great work of our operations crew that works very hard to accommodate under some, trying conditions when they can't predict, in the fall and that. I just want to say that we met last week and I was very impressed with this group. We had a very detailed meeting and a lot of data that was presented. I know it's not finalized yet, but they're getting close and they needed this meeting to finalize the report. And I think, moving forward that this study really, because you work with fielding and collaboration, so the fielding is there and this then builds off of it. I think the board is going to be very pleased once the final report comes out and we start working with the Building and Site Committee on some of the detail and then getting the full reports with the detailed information to the board. I did like their philosophy. It's almost like Tom's budget. Most likely, least likely, best case. They've got major renovation, new construction, and they got a lot of data behind it. And they got the costs, and I think when you start looking at the individual buildings as it's finalized, it's gonna make a lot of sense on certain buildings. You're gonna say, hey, it fits here, and there may be others where we may have to make some decisions on. But they have a very detailed report. Again, I was very impressed. I think that data is going to start filtering to the board. They're not finished because it's still in draft. We want to make sure that they're comfortable before you get it, but they needed to do this right here today before they could finalize that because they want to hear your thoughts and your opinion as they finalize that report. So I appreciate that excellent meeting we had, and I could tell you they have a lot of experience. The other thing, some of the main things that I'll just say, which we know as we're looking at buildings, whether it's new construction, renovation, or major renovation, and take that into the fact that some of our buildings have additions and things that we have to account for as well, and that's what we, discussed. But I know some of the priorities they put up there. I heard from the community, and I told the board I was at the state superintendent conference in January, and I went where the new bathrooms were going to be, and so that is something that we heard from our students before. And we need to take care of that. And I think that's just something that would be, across the board, whether it's in a new building or a renovated building, to accommodate the community and make sure that it's up to par for the students. Other things I do think are safety and security that were mentioned, technology, we all know we need it. I also just have to throw these two components in there, and there's different ways to go about it, but we have to take care of our special education students in the district. And I think that's going to be important. I know we had something in the 2019 bond that's critical. And then with the state, we know that early childhood, there's a continuous move towards that, and we need space for that. So there's different ways to do that. We know right now we have Cotter, and then we have, places in the buildings, but then we also have buildings that they can't really accommodate the preschool anymore because of space. So those are some of the things across the district that I think, we need. And then it's going to be getting to the individual buildings. And I do, when it came up, Trustee Zara, about the neighborhood schools, we all know, those are important. We saw some of the fielding consolidation and concept ideas, but I think we're well aware of that. And I think it's going to be a well thought out, something that the community, we're going to have some difficult choices to make. There's no doubt. But I'm confident the board can do this, and I know you will, and I know we need this, and I'm appreciative that we're getting this data, because we're going to have a lot of data to make an informed decision, to be fiscally responsible, to protect old buildings, and possibly to build new where new is needed. Thank you.
Trustee Watts, but I also have a question just before I turn on the final report. When do you expect now that you have heard from us? When do you expect that report to be finalized?
Well, go ahead.
I'd say depends on over the next month, but I would hope to have that in early June.
Trustee Watts?
Yeah, and just the final thing, I know that we're talking about safety and security inside the building. We're talking about those proper doors and entrances where you have to go to the office. And I was just thinking more of, we had talked about the parking lot, but the security and safety outside. Like, once those little ones leave our building, how many are running across the street? Some of those things we have systems in place, but I'm also wondering, like, forward thinking, how do we reimagine that? I mean, sadly, we had somebody, one of our students that was hit by a car last year on a major road. And we're speaking with city and Wayne County about that, but always thinking like, once those kids leave, what are we doing, and or how do we design that so we have that sort of safety measure in mind, because we do have those neighborhood schools. So just something for thought. That's it.
Trustee Aljami, if you have a question.
Yeah. So just clarification on the cost that I was asking for. With any budget, you have to have some kind of projection of what you're willing to spend, or what bond are you willing to put in place. I thought maybe we put some thoughts into it, but it's not necessary. It was just a question to see what's our ceiling for a bond. As far as my question on Fielden versus Quinn Evan, one of the things that I was challenged with is, did we change vendors because we prefer preservation versus new building? Because I was told that Fielden was more new buildings, and you guys are doing a great job. I just need to know what the board's direction or district marching orders is to preserve first. I truly believe in preservation if it's practical and cost effective and it's the right thing. But we want to make sure it's an objective assessment, because I feel like we change vendors. This is my understanding, and I could be 100% wrong, because the first vendor did not consider preservation. And I don't want it to be that the board is given direction to say, preservation first. If it's practical, I would love it. If it makes sense, I would love it. So that goes with that. The buildings you talked about in Ann Arbor and other places, would we be able to see any of those, to see, the finished product of any buildings that you have, whether it's in Ann Arbor or anywhere else? I mean, not all the board members are going to be willing to show up, but I would love to see what is presented, what a school looks like that you preserved, or a new building as well.
Ann Arbor is tough because we're just starting construction on some of these. So, but the work in the Washington DC area is very accessible and shows well that work, but
It doesn't have to be in
not
person.
go with the eighth grader. Are any of your eighth graders
Could that
going to
information be
Washington,
provided
DC?
virtually though? Like,
To see.
video
But yes,
or-
we can walk through much more elaborately virtually, and like I said, I think we had enough to digest today, but we have another 60 slides that we have that we can sit and talk to any member that wants to look through those befores and afters, and to talk a little more in depth about each of those projects and what it looks like. Our example here, we have a new where we could fit a new on the site. It was an elementary school that my 4 kids went to, and I said, no, that's not a one we want to we want to save, because of so many of the pedagogical factors that it's in these weird hexagons, strange shaped classrooms, and you just can't clear it out to give you that great learning and that commons environment where kids can go and do group work and they're seen by the teacher. They're not sitting out in the hallway. That's one of the uses of the commons room, which is really wonderful that they can mix. That's a big piece of using that commons.
And I think the difference between a previous report and this was, this one is going to give you options. So it'll give you the option, 3 different options for almost every building. I don't know if the last report provided options for you
With
to
costs
assess.
for
With
each
costs
option.
for each option.
Yeah, I haven't seen it detail, building by field, and so
Yeah.
I can't say, but I just want to make sure that practicality and feasibility, it's an objective report, not something that's swayed one way or another or influenced.
The fielding did have recommendations as far as to replace or to keep or to combine schools. But it did not have costs. And that's besides preservation, that's another reason why we wanted detailed information on each building, cost-wise, on various options. Trustee Barry, you had a question?
That's exactly what I was gonna say, but I also wanna add, it was not a this vendor or that vendor. We wanted more information. That's why we're here right now.
And they work with the field.
They work together,
So-
they use that information.
We didn't replace them.
No, I just heard that the focus was, Fielden was not focused on historical. They were more.
They were not, they were futuristic,
They were
but
new
we also
buildings.
wanted to know detailed numbers as far as, if this is a historical building, how much is it gonna cost us to keep this building and have major renovation to bring it to 21st century? So I hope that report, I'm hearing that we're gonna have that cost, and that is very good information for us board members, it's very good information for the public, to see that, and I'm sure that report will be made public
Yeah.
for everybody to see. And it's gonna be up to the voters to decide, but we will have to provide them options. And that's why we have Quentin Evans and we have the other firm, Miriam, to come and help us present those options to the public and get that information and say, hey, this is what we want to go forward. We want to preserve this building, or this building really needs to be gone.
I'm
The
just
majority of the residents.
Trustee
the
Ozami,
neighborhoods
it's a very valid question,
Right,
what you're asking, it's not
just
fair to
asking a
you.
question.
Yeah.
I don't want people to get defensive. I just want to know, this is what was told to me when I first came, that Fielden focused on new buildings. So if it changed, that's fine, if there's a different story to it. I just like to know why we change directions. Because when you make decisions, or you support something, or you sell it to the public, you have to know reasoning behind it. So I just want to make sure that questions are not taken as if it's meant to say something else.
Trustee Bear?
Yes, yeah, just to kind of like answer your question a little bit, nobody changes direction here and nobody's getting defensive. But we asked Fielding to give us, this is what we're looking to do. We want to go out 30 years. What they did great work. But we did that after that presentation is what we do best. We listened to our constituents, and we heard loud and clear that they wanted this also considered. That's why we're here. It's not like we told Fielding, give us 3 options, and they came back and said, oh, you have to replace these buildings. When the community reached out to us in meetings and at Kroger, at phone calls, we decided to go this direction.
So Fielden gave us what we wanted.
They gave us exactly what we asked for.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was presented just like tonight, but then we heard from the community saying, hey, we need you to take this into consideration, and we said, yes. So we're spending a lot of money doing this, but to tell our constituents, we hear you, we understand you. We want to listen to the whole community, not just the loud people in the community. We want to listen to all the community, with all the respect to everybody. That's where we're at.
Dr. Maliko, do you have any?
Yeah, I would just, one thing on that, because I know I saw it when I was with them with the draft, they're not done. But I would just say on those 3 areas, if we go into it valuing where we know, we all know the historic value of certain buildings and all buildings. And then, buildings that need, because you said like the infrastructure or the foundation is something that you need to deal with, right? So I think what's going to make sense a lot is once you get that data, and I think it really is specific, and once it's finalized, if you go in open-minded, because I think once you see the options, the financials to the value, you're going to see. And I would encourage you not to look at it holistically, like the whole district, I think you need to look at each individual building with this data. I think it's going to make a lot of sense, and so I would say be open-minded on all 3 of the preservation versus, and I think this data they have is fantastic. It's not ready yet, but it will be soon, once you get it. I think, so that's what I would encourage you to do, because that's what I did when I started looking at the individual buildings. Well, it made sense to me because I knew that building and this may work there, and I knew there was some historic value here, and then I knew this building had a renovation that maybe you could still use the renovation piece from a financial aspect. So I think if you start looking at the individual buildings versus, and I know we gotta take care of the whole district, and there's some things that'll be uniform, but I do think that, I think you mentioned it as well, that you gotta look at those buildings because each building is very unique in Dearborn, and you said it was similar to Ann Arbor. So I honestly think, I think this is a great meeting, and it's a start off to the finalizing, but I really think, trustees, that once you see the individual data and the options, you're gonna be pleased, and in a lot of cases, a lot of us may come to consensus after hearing from the public, because this is gonna make sense when you look at financials with preservation and other things. And I believe they came in very open-minded and objective. That's the data they presented to me, that again, it's not finalized, but it will be soon.
Well, that's great. We're looking forward to the report and future steps of working with other firms. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, if there are no more questions. Okay, so before we end this meeting, we do have another
We have more.
issue of business for the other institution that we serve on, which is Henry Ford
Hold on.
College.
Can we provide a little bit more information?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Do you want to talk about the committee sense?
Oh, I don't know.
We can still do that now, but-
So, just to let you know where we are with Byram and Fisk, we've been working with them as well. They've also been working with all the folks over here so that everybody's on the same page and coordinating efforts. Their next steps will be three different aspects. They will do some one-on-one stakeholder interviews with just a few select people, a board member, maybe the mayor, some other influential individuals. Then they will do several focus groups with broader audiences. But again, upon recommendations that we give them so that they are reaching out to all the community. Based upon that information, they will then do a community-wide survey that will try to touch on as many people as possible to get feedback from all of them. Their job and what they want to do is they want to do exactly what you're asking, and that is to get that sense of where the community is at. Where is the community on dollar figures? Where is the community on historic preservation as opposed to new buildings? Where's the community at on a variety of topics that are important to them? And that's what their work will be over the next several months or couple of months. So that's where we are with them and with their work.
Questions on that?
And just to kind of touch base on future millage rates, when the state law requires you to hold a bond based on a dollar value. So the board is going to have to say, we want to bond for, 500 million, billion, 1.5 billion. The board's can decide on that overall dollar value. That does not mean we're going to go out on that day and borrow that much money because we don't want to pay interest costs because we can't spend it that fast. There's, I'm sure Gilbane could talk more, but on the actual dollar value you can do in any given summer is limited because we only have that 9 to 10 weeks we can actually have construction costs. Unless we're going to look at transition schools and say, all right, we're going to close one school and combine them with another school temporarily, do the 9 months of construction, move it back in. So all depends on how we're going to structure this. Then because people are going to ask, well, how much is this going to cost in millage? So if you look at that, you can only do anywhere from 100 million to 300 million any given year. So you're looking at this could take 15 years or it could take 30 years, depending on how you package it all together. And depending on how fast you do it and how you want to spread it out, it's going to have an impact on the millage. The longer you spread it out, the lower the millage rate is because you're going to do series of bond sales over time. Could be 30 years. So that goes back to one of the questions we're gonna have to the community is, how fast do you want us to get this done? Faster we get it done, the higher millage rate you're gonna pay. The slower you wanna get it done, we can manage that millage rate to be much lower. So those are kind of questions, because everyone's gonna know what's the bottom line to me. So that's the community feedback we're gonna get to say, how do you want us to design this program? Do you wanna wait for a particular building, 20 years from now? Or do you wanna have it all done in 15 years so everybody can see the impact? So that's gonna be the impact that we're gonna have to figure out. I can't throw it out a millage right now because interest rates are gonna change. If we're doing every 3 years, a portion of that bond program, interest rates are gonna go up and down. And some of the higher rates, we could potentially refinance them, make them lower again. So what you do on the ballot question is, once we design it, is what is the first year millage and what's the average millage? And that's what will show up on the bond program when they go out to vote. So I want to share some of those facts that once we get closer, we'll have a better idea of what it will cost, but it'll be the public impact and how they want us to format this bond. And the project sequence, that could change. The board, and again, we're just proving the dollar value. So we can say, we're gonna work on these 5 buildings first, and then next year, these 5, we'll have a general conception of that, but it doesn't mean one building can move up or another building move back. That's the flexibility the board has, because we're just levying a dollar value. And some things will change. We don't know what all the costs are gonna be. They put that escalation figure in, but it's based on, the state building code. 10 years from now, they might say everybody has to have a hurricane level of building. And that means that changing the dollar value per square foot could really rise. So that's why we have to be very careful how we put this together. The quicker we do it, the higher the admin costs. The longer we do it, the lower admin costs. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, but the voters are just gonna, vote on that total dollar figure. Just want to share those kind of facts with you.
Trustee Barry, did you have a question?
Did you say hurricanes?
Well, they're talking about that, aren't they?
Question for you, Tom.
We don't have hurricanes in Michigan, but they want to put that in the building code.
I'm just,
Did he say 1.5 billion?
yeah, no. That's a real number, but, I heard that the final report probably sometime in June, then we have to go out to the public. Should I assume that we're not gonna be on the ballot in November of 2025, or don't
Well,
make that assumption?
most likely not, just because we don't want to rush it with the public.
Because people are asking.
It's going to take
Yeah.
time to educate everybody, to make sure they're comfortable and knowledgeable about it, and you just can't rush that. So
Okay.
as
No, we
Byron
don't
and
wanna rush
Fisk,
anything.
as they go through their process, they'll ask, those kind of questions to see when is the correct time to go out to vote.
Absolutely, thank you.
Sorry.
No, you're good, you're good. Some of the, just to follow up, Trustee Barry, if you look at scheduled elections right now, obviously this November, there is May of 2026 would be a time, August of 2026, and November of 2026 would all be regularly scheduled elections. That would be possible timeframes to look at. But again, as Tom pointed out, we can't rush this. It's got to be a process to make sure that everybody is digesting the information.
I just want to throw that out there that, yes, we don't want to rush things, but I can speak for myself. I always, when you're going to go out for a bond, you're going to ask the constituents, taxpayers, that kind of money, I would probably shoot for November instead of an off election. Just put that out there. Thank you.
Board discussion. So do we have any more questions on the items that were just laid out? No questions? Okay. Conclusion, final thoughts, Dr. Maliko?
Just that I think we all realize we need to do this for the long-term, stability of the district, for the students, for the community, for everyone, really. We know how important schools are to all ends of the community, to real estate values and all sorts of things. So this is very important thing that we're moving in a methodical manner with a lot of data. And I think that it's very, very important that we eventually move forward with a plan. And I think we'll get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. This was very, very insightful. And definitely over the next meetings, we will get our hands on that report and we will have more discussions. Dr. Maliko, I'd like to see this
to be discussed further in our upcoming meetings, maybe in June as a possibility, if we were saying that we're gonna get that report early June, so maybe we can have it to be as a discussion item in the June meeting. Any other thoughts? Trustee Zahar?
Yeah, can I make a motion?
Sure.
I'd like to move, are we done with everything else?
I believe we
I
are.
believe so, yes.
Okay, I'd like to move that the Board of Trustees meet in a closed section under Section 8 of the Open Meetings Act to review and consider an application for employment or appointment upon candidates' request that their employment matter remain confidential. It needs a 2/3 roll call vote.
Support.
So this is pertaining to Henry Ford College, not the district. Appointing an interim president, and we did have applicants and interviews in an ad hoc committee that was assigned to gather information. And in this closed session, we will be only receiving information from the ad hoc committee. Making any decisions.
Trustee Aljahmi,
Yes.
Trustee Barry,
Yes.
Trustee D'Ambrosio,
No.
Trustee Petlicoff,
No.
Trustee or Vice Chair Watts. Trustee Czar, yes. Chair Mozip.
Yes, so this does not pass. We can't go into a closed session. I'll be corresponding then with everybody individually. I was hoping to have everybody receive the information at the same time. But I would like to also be calling for a special meeting for the college to appoint an interim. I don't think we do need a roll call.
Motion died at the table. We get to go home early.
Okay, I'll call a motion to call for an open meeting, special meeting for the
Motion
college.
died at the table. Let's just end
No,
the
no,
meeting.
another motion for an open meeting.
Let's just end
Or
the
do we
meeting.
need, we don't really need to post.
We don't need to do anything now.
Okay.
Let's just, we get to go home early, that's all I can say.
All right, but I'll be calling for a special meeting for the college, an open meeting to appoint an interim. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Trust,
Yeah.
Chair, you could ask for